It's good to have friends in high places, and Jeremy Corbyn has friends in all the highest places in the Middle East. He used to be a paid commentator on Iranian government television. He has referred to Hamas terrorists and Hezbollah terrorists as friends. None of this prevented him from being elected and reelected again for decades as the member of parliament for Islington North, the Islington North constituency in London, and um, it didn't prevent him from being elected the Labour leader, and then winning re-election as the leader at least once, I think. And running and almost becoming prime minister of this country in 2017, and then being not as close in 2019. It hasn't prevented him, after he got kicked out of the Labour Party, from running as an independent and winning that seat in an election where Labour won by a landslide and won many new seats. They lost the seat that they held previously with Jeremy Corbyn to Jeremy Corbyn. So this guy is super popular, and he is now starting his own party-ish with four other independents who were elected in the election in early July in the UK, elected pretty much on a pro-Hamas ticket. I mean, the Labour government just announced that they're putting more restrictions on selling weapons to Israel. They withdrew Britain's objections to the arrest warrants for Israel's leaders. They are the British government under Labour is very much pro-Hamas, but it is not pro-Hamas enough for some. And those in parliament who got elected by such people who think Labour is not pro-Hamas enough, again, are now forming their own party. Welcome to the reality show. I'm joined by Marco and Richard. Marco, your thoughts on this new party? Will you consider voting for them in the next general election?
Yeah, it's quite tempting, isn't it? Um, well, first of all, it's not a party as such. It's just a group in Parliament, and probably because they couldn't really agree about leadership and structure and stuff like that. Because part of the membership is made up of people who splintered from the Labour Party. Or all of them, in fact, used to be associated with the Labour Party, voting for the Labour Party, but then because they assessed that the Labour Party wasn't being pro-Hamas enough, at least not openly, they decided to set up their own camp. And actually, they won in their own five separate areas, and now they are able to get together in Parliament. And why do I do this? Because they love friendship or collaboration? Certainly not. It's because once you have a group or a party in Parliament, you have certain privileges, i.e., you can ask for more time to speak, and there's all sorts of procedures that you can do as a group, but not as an independent. So this move is not dictated by the love of democracy and things like that. It's just dictated by the fact that pragmatic need to access procedures that otherwise would be beyond them. And of course, they worked out that they can be much more anti-Israel and anti-Semitic if they work together rather than one person on his own. Because let's not forget that the Labour Party, led by this particular donkey, Jeremy Corbyn, was actually found during an official independent review to be breaching the Equality Act 2010 on two counts, and they found that 18 were borderline. So is a proven, declared anti-Semite who fostered anti-Semitism during his run. The only problem is that the current leader and the current deputy leader of the Labour Party were actually pretty high up in the hierarchy. Keir Starmer, the current prime minister, used to be his number two. So despite his protestation of having said, "Oh yeah, I was just supporting Corbyn because he would never win," which kind of also points out the fact that our current prime minister not only is a knee-taking little flip-floppers, but it's also a bit of a bastard betraying back, stab in the back kind of guy, because it was pretended to support Corbyn, and then at the same time it was kind of hoping he would lose. So, but more about these two nice characters later on.
Yeah, the group that they've formed is called the Independent Alliance Group, and because there's going to be five of them, that makes them the same size as the fifth biggest. That makes them equivalent to the fifth biggest group in Parliament, equivalent to the Reform Party with Nigel Farage heading it. They've got the same number of MPs, equivalent to the DUP in Northern Ireland, and more than the Green Party. So that gives you an idea of their size. Yeah, as we covered here, it's not technically a party. Had they formed a political party in advance of going to the election and fought it as a political party rather than being a group of independent MPs, they could at this point have received some funding from, poor Joe Blogs, the taxpayer, from the government for the fact they funded a party, and they would have got about £22,000 per MP for that, which is what other parties like Reform do, plus some other extra expenses and some stupid figures. I think they get £44.53 per 200 votes. That's the kind of system we run in Britain. On top of that, but they're not getting that. But they are going to get the kind of clout that Mark is talking about there, the chance to raise questions in Parliament, but on more questions at PMQs, or when the Prime Minister does answers questions, once a week from MPs and that kind of thing. And I think the analysis as to why they haven't formed a party is probably accurate, because they've sort of got an aligned agenda, but they probably can't agree who the leader should be. Although Jeremy Corbyn is by far the most famous, and he is essentially will be the figurehead of this group simply by that fact alone. And of course, he brings to it a different emphasis than the others, because he brings all the history of being the former leader of the Labour Party, of being at the far left end of Labour, and of badging together all the other things that are going on at the government at the moment that the left are against, such as the fact that the two child cap. I don't want to get too into the weeds here, but effectively, if you have more than two kids, you don't get more benefits for additional kids, something that the Tories put in and Labour has decided to retain, and Corbyn and his far lefties would like to increase it to as many kids as you want. You could have money from the taxpayer for, which just leads to enormous families and a big drain on poor Joe Bloggs, the taxpayer again. So, but anyway, to focus on these five just for a second, they're Shaukat Adnan, Ajud Khan, Adnan Hussein, Iqbal Mohammed, from places like Birmingham, Blackburn, Batley, and of course Islington North. So some of them only scraped through, to be honest. But Jeremy Corbyn, and another reason why he would be considered, the figurehead of it, he got over 7,000 votes, a majority of over 7,000 votes when he got defeated Labour. And Labour came second in all five of these seats. Of course, we've got a whole bunch of pro-Hamas parties. We've also got the Workers' Party under Galloway, who also came close in a number of places, but didn't manage to get their MPs elected. But it's not only Labour or only them, and of course there were some Greens as well that were equally mired in pro-Hamas attitudes as well. So it's a dirty mess, frankly, and this is just it getting an extra level of attention.
Yeah, sounds like Corbyn is a diversity hire in that group. He does stand out in many ways. So one thing that's mentioned, there's in a BBC article about this is yeah, as you mentioned, it says already outnumbering the Green Party and matching the number of Reform UK MPs. The new Independent Alliance has made a pitch to recruit more members after 7 of Mr. Corbyn's allies were suspended from the Parliamentary Labour Party. I believe, was this over the child cap? Yeah, yeah, this was over the benefit cap for basically you don't get benefits beyond 2 children. And I think he stands a chance there. First of all, it worked out in his case. He was suspended by Labor and he's back. So this could be a growing movement. And we do see as the war continues the pro-Hamas side is, is they're not giving up. This is their issue. Just like, Hamas is not going to give up because it is their issue as long as Jews live. And yeah, we did so first of all, we did an episode wondering whether Jeremy Corbyn will form Hamas UK, as we called it, back in, I believe it was February or somewhere around that time. And we also did an episode after the election about the Muslim vote, because the Muslim vote very much went, and you could see that the higher percentage of voters in an area are Muslim, the more likely they were to not vote Labour, again, in an election where Labour won by a landslide. And all five of these members of parliament defeated Labour members of parliament, right? Or Labour, was it all sitting Labour MPs, right?
In the case of Ashford, yeah.
Probably. I
Yeah.
don't know for definite, but they were certainly all Labour candidates who came in second. Yeah.
Yeah, and so that tells you something about uh, like we said in that episode about where the Muslim community stands in the UK. It is a pretty much united community, and is very much against Israel. And I would assume, and I think people might be afraid to assume this, but I would assume also against the UK. And it's great for them to have Jeremy Corbyn as their figurehead. By the way, it's no surprise that they would also be against the child benefit cap. They do like to procreate and have soldiers join their future armies. Marco.
Yes, it's not a surprise that in Britain the most common name for a newborn is actually Mohammed. And despite official statistics that lie to you every year for the last 5-10 years, it's been the case because Mohammed has got three major spellings. But if you put them together, they usually outweigh the most English or at least Anglo-Saxon name by a factor of 3 or 4. So there's no surprise there that the Muslim community like to have children, and of course would like for everybody else to pay for it, like we pay for most of them, given that they seem to be among the receivers of welfare, among the highest, given the percentage of the Muslim community in Britain, which is about 12%, they have a higher intake of benefits. So. But yeah, the irony is that on the 4th of July, while the United States was celebrating Independence Day, Britain was effectively voting itself into a more authoritarian, less liberal state. And during that particular election, for the first time in Britain, we actually saw the resurgence of the sectarian vote, a vote dictated only by the racist view of religion. People voted because they were Muslims rather than because they were Labour or lefty or whatever. And this is a thing that we saw happen. We knew it was going to happen a couple of years before, really. And that unfortunately happened. And it's to be honest, probably just the beginning of the landslides, the thin end of the wedge, really, because as they see that they make way, they're gonna strengthen the bonds within the community more and more and more. And the Labour Party will have to rely more and more on external agreement with other people who are not officially in the Labour Party. However, let's also not forget that the Labour Party itself still has lots of members who are officially Labour still, member of Parliament I'm talking about, who are actually still very much aligned with Corbyn. We're talking about John McDonnell, we're talking about Rebecca Long Bailey, Emily Thornberry, Diane Abbott, a plethora of weirdos who are probably, I wouldn't be surprised if they left the Labour Party and joined this new group, because they were hardliner supporter of Corbyn. Most of them are wackos, proper Marxists, old-fashioned, leather wallet carrying kind of 70s kind of mentality. So I wouldn't be surprised if we're going to see some other people join this group, if anything else, because as you mentioned, Razi, because of the voting against the will of the Labour Party, some MPs had their whip suspended, which means they're not formally under the aegis of the Labour Party as such, although they're still members for them. And one of these people is the woman who the other day was gloating about the fact she managed to jump the queue on the NHS because she had a pro-Palestinian stance. So we're going to see lots of the stuff, and it can only get worse, really.
Yeah, that last woman you mentioned there was Jess Phillips. She's got a Birmingham constituency. She only just held back the Workers' Party, Galloway's lot, by just under 700 votes because of her pro-Palestinian stance. So, and of course, she's getting her NHS treatment thanks to that, which is something we covered in one of the other shows. I think one of the factors that's really interesting about this is this Muslim population factor, because out of these 5 constituencies we're talking about who've got together with this group, 4 of them are in the top 15 for being the largest Muslim populations in the UK. But there are bigger ones. I mean, the biggest one of all is in Bradford West, where the Muslim population is 58.7%. And that one saw its Labour majority slashed quite a bit, but they still managed to win. So, the effect of all this is far wider. That's the point I'm trying to make, really, is the effect is far wider than it seems by just focusing on these 5. You have to be very careful and not thinking it's only a fraction of them. It's only a tiny representation, because it's much more complicated than that. And of course, what Marco referred to there about the welfare benefit relationship to the Muslim population, that's borne out by official national statistics when you analyze them and you look at and the recent census survey shows all that low levels of education, high levels of welfare benefits, and of course all of that is played upon when this issue is brought up. And of course, but this speaks to far wider than just whether they're Muslim or not, because of course there are an awful lot of lefty people, the kind that wear kaffirs for fashion statements, the kind that walk on marches every other weekend or every weekend. There's a legion of those, whether they're highly educated or just pro-Hamas flying flag supporters. There's plenty of them as well, in addition to those Muslims.
Bradford West, was that George Galloway's constituency, or was it his previous constituency? Because he moves around, right? You don't remember off the top of your head, that's fine.
It was Rochdale where he was.
Oh, yeah.
So, yes, yeah, but it's the same kind of lovely place.
But the last time he won a by-election, that may have been in Bradford West. I think it was.
Yeah, he's certainly. Yeah, I think you're right.
Yeah, and George Galloway, somebody also brought him up in the chat. It is, I mean, he's not in Parliament, so it's not relevant at the moment. But again, if this does form into some sort of an actual party, they could, or they could join his party. I don't know if that's in the cards for them, but yeah, I mean, I don't want to give them any ideas, but there is potential there because there are people in Parliament with views, as you mentioned, in the Labour Party that are more compatible with this new group that Jeremy Corbyn started than with the current Labour Party leadership, which that's not to praise the current Labour Party leadership, which is bad, but it's not bad enough for some people. So yeah, there's potentially that could grow into something to watch, something that could have an impact in the future. I mean, the next election is probably 5 years away, but there are many local elections. There are going to be by-elections from time to time. By-elections, historically, the ruling party always does badly in those. So yeah, there's we see in public discourse how it is very much the narrative is pro-Hamas. From time to time, we hear some voices challenging that, but mostly apologetically. and you know, it's natural that this followed into politics to a large extent, because again, it's not that there are 5 people pro-Hamas in parliament. Most people in parliament are pro-Hamas. 5 of them have their own party that is united on this issue, and that is their main issue. So yeah, you know, where we go from here is going to be something to see, and again, with there being no real alternative on the other side, we spoke about Israeli politics previously, and we talked about how Netanyahu, if the alternative to him is the Israeli left, then people go with him. But in the UK, if the alternative to Labour is the current Conservative Party, then it's probably going to be more than 5 years than we have the people we have now in power, and it could be that the Corbyn wing of that larger left-wing movement only grows stronger.
Yeah, well, I don't know. I mean, to be honest, already the official government, you know, the people who belong to the Labour Party and they are under the whip of the Labour Party, I think, frankly, they're just not voicing as much as the Corbyn group does. They're not actually coming out as proper support for Hamas, because let's not forget we have nice elements like the Deputy Prime Minister, Angela Rayner, who before the election was literally begging a group of male Muslims in a mosque, no woman in sight, of course, because they love diversity. Um, she was begging them and promising them, we're gonna go for a ceasefire, but you must give me your vote and blah 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 blah. So you actually have lots of elements who, from the outside, look perhaps neutral at best, but they're actually not at all on the side of Israel, not at all on the side of civilization as a whole. In fact, they're quite happy to intervene in all sorts of issues, like stop people smoking outside a pub or a restaurant, or intervening in a debate how much should a concert ticket cost, and all this kind of very, very authoritarian actually intervention. They are certainly not on the side of freedom. We've seen the kind of two-tier justice and two-tier consideration about the riots that we had. The prime minister and deputy prime minister were quite happy to be on their knees and effectively wave through attacking the police if you are on the BLM side. But you know, any other person for any other reason doing the same thing would be absolutely condemned, you know, 100%. And of course, anyone attacking a policeman while they're doing their duty is totally in the wrong. But if the political discourse attached to it was totally one-sided and totally on a different level on different instances. And of course, we have a plethora of political appointment, which often bypass the normal procedure. So you have friends of the Labour Party, donors of the Labour Party, which are slotted in places without going through the usual processes, especially when they become official civil servants, which are supposed to follow a certain procedure. And let's not forget also the lovely lady Sue Gray, who was the woman as a member of a civil service. She was in charge of doing an investigation about this so-called breaches of rules during the lockdown from the Conservative Party at the time. The Prime Minister was Boris Johnson, and she was in charge to effectively showing how the rules were breaching by the Tory government, ignoring totally the fact that most of the people breaching the rules were actually civil servants, not politicians, but that doesn't mind. Anyway, this woman who was a member of the civil service, it should have been totally neutral on the stance, just checking the facts, actually became chief of staff of Keir Starmer soon after Boris Johnson was kicked out. His career was made effectively unsustainable, which is thank you for doing that, because we didn't like the guy. But on the other hand, she kind of abused her position, and now she's the gatekeeper for the prime minister. And if this is not corruption at the highest level, I'm sorry, but that's what we're going to see more and more from this government.
I think if you look at the top of this government as it is, even without considering this group, you can already see so many changes for the worse in the few weeks since they came to power, and certainly in relation to Israel. I mean, you mentioned two of the different policies that they've adopted. In fact, they're not contesting the ICC arrest warrant for Netanyahu, and the fact that they've suspended some of these arms sales licenses. And there's a third one to that tranche, of course, the restarting of the funding for UNRWA. Which is, so that's three own goals in terms of the moral position. You've literally done the wrong thing in three ways, and you are supposedly the people making those decisions are supposedly the better end of the Labour Party, the pro-Jewish end that we're supposed to think, and yet look at the actions. It's the actions that tell you really what their position is. And of course, why have they done all that? They've done it partly because they promised, so in essence, that to their voters a matter of a few weeks ago in order to get the majority over the line that they needed, as well as of course, being pretty much relentlessly anti-Jewish at core through much of their party throughout, as we discussed with the previous incarnation that contained many of the same people, even if it was headed by Corbyn at the time. So yeah, it's I don't know. Try and find a decent spin to put on this. And the only decent spin I can come up with at all is that this is starting to appear as an issue when it comes to the Conservative Party leadership contest, which is going on at the moment. Who's going to lead the Conservative Party, and what are they saying about this kind of issue? People like Kemi Badenoch, who's possibly the front runner to take over the Conservative Party, certainly one of the top two likely to. She's been coming out and saying a few things in her launch yesterday. She said she was concerned about the malign and destructive identity politics, and the fact that she was, quote, she was talking about the reform and saying she wasn't worried about reform. She was, quote, more worried about the 5 new MPs, these are the ones we're talking about, elected on the back of sectarian Islamist politics, alien ideas that have no place here, the sort of politics we need to defeat and defeat quickly, unquote. So, I mean, to hear that said from who is likely to be representing one of the two major parties is good. It is only words, but it is words you want to hear, and words you want to hear, said loudly at this particular point. One other quote she said, I'll just throw it in now whilst I'm on a roll. She said, quote, when Taiwan is under threat from China, when Israel is under threat from Iran, when Ukraine is under threat from Russia, we need to ask ourselves if we're ready for the dangers of the new world. I would have liked that quote to have ended with something a bit more punchy than that, but she started off by identifying the top 3 things which are a major issue here. So,
I mean, look, that's surprisingly good from somebody who actually try not to break things here, but surprisingly good from somebody who might actually lead one of the two major parties. Yeah, it's nice to hear a conservative leader who's going to take a hard line on Britain's enemies rather than a hard line on Coca-Cola. So this is definitely an improvement. And I saw Corbyn tweet about her, so she's clearly doing something good if she's pissing off the wrong people. Davey Boy says in the chat, in the 2015 election, George Galloway labeled Labour's Naz Shah as a militant Zionist. I don't remember that. I do know who Naz Shah is. I remember her defeating him, and I thought, oh, that's good. And she is actually, I don't know if it's as anti-Semitic as him, but definitely not a good person. And which tells you was that one in Bradford West, Richard? Do you remember if that election was contested in Bradford West? Anyway,
yes.
I'm anointing you the resident political historian who's supposed to know all elections and by-elections. But yeah, anyway, he beat her somewhere. He moves around a lot. He's been MP a few times for a few different places. But really, we know who he's really representing wherever he is the MP for. Yeah, I think Marco, you touched on this. Labor, the Labor Party is going to be, you gave the example of the candidate who went to a mosque and begged for people's votes. Yeah, if this becomes a thing, and especially if some Labor MPs leave for this group, even if it's a few, even if it's not all of the seven mentioned, and and they win a couple of by-elections, this is going to put pressure on Labor in the way that Reform put pressure on the Conservatives. Because yeah, Reform. If Reform's votes had gone to the Conservatives and all the seats where they were split, I don't know if the Conservatives would have won, but they definitely wouldn't have lost by such a landslide. So this will definitely be a concern for Labor, and how much Labor will move towards the Muslim vote in the future. Again, it's not just a future as in 5 years from now. It's next year and the year after when there's local elections. Uh, to what extent will Labor say, look, we're not pro-Hamas enough. Maybe we should endorse the arrest warrant for Netanyahu. Maybe we should cut off trade with Israel. I don't know. I don't think they'll go that far, but I don't think they could go that far because that's probably an EU decision. Um, Wait, we're not in the EU, but we still have to abide by a bunch of their decisions, right? Anyway, I am wondering to what extent this group it's not just the influence of 5 votes of if there's a vote in parliament that's close enough that 5 votes decided that's the only time they have an impact. No, they will have an impact on the ruling party, and that should scare us.
Well, we've seen the impact already acting on David Lammy. David Lammy is the current Foreign Office minister, which
Foreign
is
Secretary.
secretary, which is effectively the equivalent of the Secretary of State for the United States. So he's in charge of foreign policy. Well, he's the face of the foreign policy because foreign policy in Britain is done by the civil servants in the Foreign Office, people who are historically pro-Arab and pushing the line of Hamas all the time. So even if you wanted to follow a different policy, probably you wouldn't be allowed. Anyway, that's not a problem because that's not his issue. He's clearly anti-Israel, despite making a few statements at the beginning of the war in Israel in October 23, between October and the beginning of this year. He actually made a few statements, made me think like, wow, I must have probably misjudged you. I was quite ready to change my opinion because I know the guy enough. But anyway, I was surprised at the time when he was coming out saying Israel should be allowed to defend itself and blah, blah, blah. But now actually his actions speak quite clearly. The fact that yesterday I announced the ban of the sale of certain equipment for Israel, weaponry and machinery, and spare parts that would allow them to, effectively have a supply, although a small percentage coming from Britain, they would allow an additional supply of military equipment. And the problem, you're totally right. I think here the pressure that they were given by these independents popping up all over the place is definitely has left a scar on the Labour Party people. They certainly realize that if they don't turn towards the Muslim vote a bit more, they will lose some of the seats. A few seats already had been lost because of the Islamist parties. And despite Labour being fairly strong in other areas, for example, Ian Duncan Smith, a former Conservative leader, nearly lost his seat had it not been for the independent jihadi party splitting the vote for Labour. If Labour and they had some kind of agreement, Ian Duncan Smith would be out now, and we would have another pro-Palestinian candidate as a winner. But of course, all these instances will come to the fore when we get close to some kind of election, and the Labour Party political office will realize that they need to have some kind of agreement with these parties, either by having an electoral pact providing support, or by joining them or letting them come in exchange for jihad-friendly policies. Either way, it's not going to be good news for Israel. It's not going to be good news for Britain, and certainly it's not going to be good news for anyone else.
What Lamy said and announced yesterday was that they're cancelling 30 out of 350 arms export licenses to Israel. So 30 of them will no longer be able to export arms to 30 of these companies will no longer be able to export arms to Israel. They include parts for fighter jets, parts for helicopters, parts for drones. It's worth noting that only like 1% of Israel's defense imports come from the UK. Now you can ask yourself why only 1% come from an inverted commas ally like the UK. Well, I can give you a pretty clear answer on that. It's because we're serial abstainers at the UN. We are very weak allies of Israel. So why would you rely on importing any more than 1% from a country that is likely to whip it out from under you at the first opportunity? And this is what's happening now. Of course, even the mainstream parties like the Liberal Democrats have said that there should be more licenses they look at. And the Greens have asked why there's so many exemptions. Why haven't they, cancelled more export licenses? So even those mainstream parties who ostensibly present themselves on an environmentalist platform or whatever are actually, as anti-Semitic as the rest of them, as keen to promote Hamas in this conflict as the rest of them. So it's, I think. If you want to look at Lamy I realize I missed a quotes here, but here's a quote from Lamy to give you an idea of what's going on. Because when he cancelled these licenses, he gave this reason in Parliament. He said, because there, quote, exists a clear risk that they, Israel, might be used to commit, the weapon, might be used to commit or facilitate a serious violation of international humanitarian law. Of course, he said all that whilst also refunding UNRWA, where he could see no clear risk that such funding would end up, violating humanitarian law by, of course, funding Hamas directly with money and resources.
Yeah, and just to be clear, the decision was to cancel some export licenses. There's no similar decision on any import licenses, right? Much like Ireland, I think the UK is happy to buy from Israel, but not to sell to it. We talked on this channel about when this was put into review by the UK government, when that was announced by David Lammy, right after, I think it was the day after, 12 Israeli children and teenagers were killed in Majd el-Shams by Lebanese missile, and now he announces this the day after six hostages are executed by Hamas, and 3 Israelis are killed in a terrorist attack, including the father of somebody who was killed on October 7th. So I don't know if the timing is intentional. I mean, I wouldn't put it past him. I would assume it's not, but who knows? Yeah, David Lammy, somebody here in the chat somewhere, I'm not going to be able to find it now, but said something like David Lammy is too Zionist for some of these parties, which sounds ridiculous, but apparently that is the case. I mean, again, this government follows up the slaughter of Jews by announcing that it will not take part, will not have any part in Israel defending itself, itself from the slaughter of Jews and non-Jews, Israeli citizens, because in Majd el-Shams it was not Jews. And again, I've seen people on Twitter, members of parliament on Twitter, praising this decision, and as you mentioned, those who criticize it say it's not enough. But this is where I think this is where politically Britain is heading. And again, Corbyn is something else that was mentioned in the chat is he very charismatic? And the answer is he's very ideological. He is ideological, and that is what is attractive about him to so many, and that is what got him nearly elected in 2017. That is what keeps him in politics, no matter how much stuff comes out about him, about his anti-Semitism. I remember back when he was leader, one of the years during Hanukkah, an Israeli Jewish holiday, he put out some statement about Hanukkah, wishing a happy Hanukkah for the to Jews, and within that statement, said something about the suffering of the Palestinian people. And I wonder if it's like, why, what made him make that connection in that specific statement that required a mention of the Palestinian people. And of course, I don't really wonder. I know what it is, and anybody who's looked into Corbyn's career enough and listened to him talk enough knows what it is, and that is what a big part of what makes him popular.
Yeah, about the statement, I don't think it's a coincidence at all that the statement was made the day after the six bodies were found, or the hostages. Either it was done in an attempt to bury the news under the six hostages found, or it was done deliberately to actually, throw in their face to show they wannabe jihadi supporters that they're actually working for them. Because the Labour Party is a bunch of people who are effectively professional victims, whingers, and offenderati. So that they would be the first to pick up on the scandal nuances. And I'm sure that they did this statement for a good reason. I don't believe for a second it was an accident. Because after all, they are so good at managing the media, not least, most of the media are actually in their pocket. The BBC, we know how anti-Semitic BBC has been throughout this thing, and how much in support of Labour is all the time. For example, just a few days ago, it was revealed that an MP, a current MP in East London, as he's a landlord, he's got a few properties which he rents, and they were all effectively slums, very poor condition, very falling apart, not maintained. And he's a Labour MP, but we don't hear about it. Had he been a Conservative MP, he would have been crucified by now. He probably would have to walk on the streets on his knees, with flagellating himself and asking for forgiveness. But the media, when it comes to left infractions and people on the left doing something wrong, they're very quiet, and they tend to bury things quite easily. So again, I don't think for a second this media choice was accidental.
I mean, just to add to that little anecdote there, Marcus said about the landlord MP, he also was the guy who introduced a bunch of landlord licenses for the area of London he lives in. So if you own a property there and you wanted to rent it out, you had to buy a license for each property. And he didn't have a bunch of licenses for his own properties. That's the kind of dude he is. So he's been, called up over all that. I think, well, what can we say here? What can we say I mean, all of this gives the, as I think the chief rabbi pointed out, it feeds the lie that Israel is in breach of international law with this. I mean, we know international law is a load of old nonsense anyway, a load of old hooey, but nevertheless, that's all that's being read by this constantly. I mean, you're saying you're supporting Israel's right to defend itself, but you're tying its hands behind its back all the time. You're forcing it to the floor and saying capitulate at every time that you say keep fighting, and that is just depressing to see. I think the only guy who I saw saying anything particularly good about this was the Israeli Minister for Diaspora Affairs. His name's Amichai Chikli, because he tied the two things together and got to the principle of what's going on here. Because he said the fight against ISIS and Al-Qaeda and Hamas It's the same war between the Western civilization and radical Islam. The threat that is coming from Hamas is also an inner threat that you are facing on the streets of the UK. And that's the crucial element here. And that's in part why we cover this issue so much on this channel, because it extends beyond the borders of Israel. It is the crucial fight between civilization and barbarism. It is the fact that you are constantly in the way this is presented, you are lessening civilization. You are increasing the chances of barbarism being promoted and succeeding in its hideous aims in the future through these violent, ugly methods.
Yeah, and again, this new party or this new group of MPs is set up to as clearly as possible take a stand in this battle between civilization and barbarism. We know where they stand. We also know where we stand, and if you want to stand with us, can certainly consider becoming a member and supporting our work. One of the things you will get access to if you're a member at any level on YouTube or through the website is the Atlas Shrugged Book Club, which starts in 10 minutes. Today's session is, if you haven't read Atlas Shrugged, it will feature spoilers, but it's just chapter 4. So, there's time to catch up, probably as soon as by next week's session. It's session 16, but it's chapter 4, which gives you an indication of the speed, intentionally slow speed at which we are going through this. So you get access to that. You get access to a lot more, and you get to support the work we're doing here. Yeah, any parting thoughts, and where can people find more from you, Marco and Richard?
Yeah, well, first of all, about the Atlas Shrugged. If you are a member, you can catch up on all the episodes. So if you feel like joining now, don't worry about it. You can read up to chapter 4, watch the old sessions and stuff. Yeah, just to finish off, I'd like to point out from Lami's statement the use of the words international humanitarian law. I mean, already international law is bollocks. International humanitarian law is an additional level of fuzziness that they make up to make their point stand out. Effectively legitimize their own anti-Semitism and their own, destruction of relationship with Israel and putting Israel on the back foot. But it's international humanitarian law. It's not our fault. Pathetic.
We're mere weeks into this new parliament so far. We've got a full 5 years to go. As Razi mentioned earlier, you could have a whole bunch of by-elections between now and that date, and those are going to be really telling as to the way the wind is blowing. But already you can see the way the wind is blowing in the key decisions that the government is taking, and none of it is in favour of Israel. All of it is in favour of Hamas. And that is so depressing to see. The cold comfort, perhaps, or the slight comfort that the Conservative Party may have a voice against this, but they were pretty gutless in government. So what is that? It's easy to sit on the opposition benches and make the kind of statements that you don't necessarily make when you're in the hot seat. I would like to see somebody with the ideological convictions that are the right convictions and that they stick with them. So you don't want the ideology that Corbyn holds, but you want somebody with a correct ideology who really does stick to it and understands the principles behind it. So will we get that? Probably not. But hey, that's a chink of hope in what is a really rather depressing picture.
So check out the Briefly Objective sister channel to this one, and check out the ARCUK Substack. Comment, share, everything helps.
Yeah, Bonnie did remind us to also mention Substack. All three of us have articles in Substack, and there are more coming. It's been, I think, 9 days, but that's mostly because I've been out of commission most of those days. But there are more articles coming in the next few days. So make sure you sign up. Of course, there is a paywall there. as well. But at most membership levels, that paywall is covered by your membership. All right, thanks guys, thanks everybody for watching, and we will be back tomorrow with the Daily Objective and the reality show.
Bye.